Hey everyone, it's Horror Free For All, and I hope you're having a great day so far today. I have a ranking video slash review. It's kind of a mixture of both of the first season of the Creepshow television series. Now, Creepshow season 1, to put this into perspective, a few years ago, me being one of the biggest Creepshow fans I know, I've loved the original film ever since I was a kid. It's my favorite movie ever made, and the Creepshow franchise as a whole is something I've loved for a long time. I've even stayed a fan after Creepshow 3 dropped in 2006 and killed the franchise for many years. But when I saw that they were making a Creepshow season 1, I had high hopes because I love Creepshow 1, like I said, from 1982. Creepshow 2 from 1987 is a solid film, right? And for those of you that don't know, that movie we got was not on the intended script. 2 stories were supposed to be in it. One went on to be in Tales from the Dark Side, the movie from 1990, and I reviewed that, and I consider that the real Creepshow 3. And then there was an unmade Tales from the Dark Side 2, which I read the stories for and reviewed on the channel as well, with a story called Pinfall that was supposed to be in Creepshow 2. So at this point of the reviews on the channel, I pretty much covered all bases on the films. And tying back to my thoughts on this, a couple years ago, I was so excited for it until I saw that Taurus Entertainment Group was going to be attached to it, and Greg Nicotero had me with mixed feelings too. Now, Taurus Entertainment Group is behind Creepshow 3 from 2006, aka the worst fucking film I've ever watched in my life, / the biggest dump on a franchise I think the horror community has ever seen. Quite frankly. That movie's an abomination through and through. And that had my red flags going. And to put this into perspective, this shirt, this piece of merchandise, was actually funded by Taurus Entertainment Group, which makes me kind of sick even wearing it. But it looks cool nonetheless. I was very nervous. And the second thing was Greg Nicotero. I know that he and Tom Savini had a good relationship, and Tom Savini pretty much kicked off the Creepshow franchise with George Romero and Stephen King. And Nicotero did the second film, but I did not like the design that I think they went with the creep in that movie. I call him Dick and Ballface Creep, aka the grandpa from Hey Arnold Creep. I was nervous. I was like, are they going to do the same creep from Creepshow 2, or are they going to go back to the original one? And then I saw the concept trailer release. I saw some leaked photos, and I was like, holy crap. Maybe they're going to bring a product I'm going to enjoy. And I remember watching this casually, and I really enjoyed this first season. Now, for this review, I went back and rewatched all these episodes in order, and I decided to take all 12 segments across 6 episodes because there's 2 segments per episode. And I ranked them from least favorite to most favorite. So we're going to start with number 12 at the bottom and work our way all the way to the top of which one was my favorite episode from the season. Sit back, grab some popcorn, and prepare to hear my thoughts. So, at number 12, my least favorite segment from Creepshow Season 1 goes to Lydia Lane's Better Half. And this one was written by John Harrison and Greg Nicotero. I gave this story a 3 out of 5 stars, which is a decent score. It's a decent segment here. But I was really disappointed because John Harrison was a director from the Tales from the Dark Side TV show, and he had a long history with George Romero and Greg Nicotero and a bunch of people back in the late 80s. And seeing him come back and seeing him actually co-write an episode with Greg Nicotero, I had high hopes, but this episode just kind of fell flat. The story is not the greatest thing ever. You have this woman tycoon type of boss. She runs a company. There's 2 people vying for a promotion. She promotes one over the other. The other person gets angry with her, and they have a war with words, and something may happen to one of her employees that she works for due to her own folly. And she spends the rest of the segment going through trying to cover up what happened to her, and she ends up getting stuck in the elevator, and that's pretty much where a majority of the episode takes place. There may or may not be some psychosis involved. There may or may not be some supernatural stuff going on, and the ending is very schlocky and kind of out of nowhere. Yeah, it has decent acting. It has a decent idea, but I just feel like it's one of those stories where the tires are churning, but nothing is really happening. There's a lot of just cheap fake outs, hallucinations, and it was all a dream sequences. It's very padded. It probably could have served best as like a comic adaptation in the comic series as opposed to an episode. And it's a shame. It's just a decent story. All right. And at number 11, this one's a slight step up, but it's still a decent type of rating for me. And I know this episode is loved by the fans. I used to really enjoy this episode back in the day. Rewatching it now, it's not really my speed. But it's called The Man in the Suitcase, and this was a story by Christopher Wellman. I gave this one a 3.25 out of 5 stars, which is an upper decent score. So this story has a decent concept to it. It's about this guy. He comes home after a long flight, and his girlfriend has broken up with him, and he ends up picking up his luggage, or at least what he thinks is his luggage, and he takes it home with him, and he does some drugs to try to cope with what happened. And it's revealed that there's a man inside of his suitcase that's all fucked up and contorted, like shoved in there. And every time this man is experiencing pain, he spits out some real pieces of gold. So when the guy discovers this, he wants to help him, and he's conflicted about helping this man in the suitcase. But his roommate and his ex-girlfriend get involved. And this whole episode is pretty much just doing fucked up shit to the man in the suitcase, essentially. And there's a predictable kind of ending, like some double crossing going on, but it does end on a happier note than usual in the Creepshow episodes, I would say. And yeah, you know, it has a decent concept. I think the monster of the episode went on to become a Funko Pop, which is cool, but it just wasn't scary to me. It was just more torture porn than an actual horror story. Had decent acting to it, just it felt a little too repetitive in the story for me. And it just wasn't something I was really all that enthused about this time around. So that's why I have it here at number 11. But I still think it's a decent one, all right? Now, at number 10, we're starting to enter into the territory of what I call good. This episode was called Bad Wolf Down. And this one was written by Rob Schrab, who I'm a massive fan of. He co-wrote Monster House with Dan Harmon, the creator of Rick and Morty, and I love that movie. That's one of my favorite movies of all time. He also wrote a comic series called Scud the Disposable Assassin, which is one of my favorite comic series of all time. And he also wrote Community, which is one of my favorite comedy shows of all time. And when I saw that he was making an episode on his Twitter, I was so jazzed. And when I watched it, I was just taken back by how schlocky it was, and that's pretty much why I put it this low. I think I gave this like a 3.5 out of 5. So the story takes place in like World War II. These American GIs are over in France, and they just killed a bunch of Nazis, but they're getting ready to be outnumbered by a bigger Nazi general with a bigger like horde of Nazis with them. So they end up running into the woods where there's like beware signs that there might be werewolves or something lurking. And they end up inside of this like prison, and they see a bunch of dead Nazis, and they end up coming across this woman inside that's speaking a foreign language, and they may or may not come to the conclusion that this woman might have some supernatural abilities. And one of the GIs does something really shady to the rest of the troops, and the troops have to figure out a way to survive the night because the Nazi general is on the way, and he has a bloodlust for what happened to some of his people early on. And it's a good comeuppance ending for one of the main assholes of the story. But the way it's delivered is my biggest issue. It's just so ridiculous. Like, you have these werewolves and stuff, but the direction they chose was to do, like, a lichen, a werewolf on all fours, and then an actual wolfman. Like, the aesthetic choices here just seem really goofy and over the top. There was some gratuitous gore and violence to it, but I couldn't really take this episode seriously, but I had enough fun with it, you know. I wish there was just more to it, unfortunately. But, yeah, it's a good episode, just on the lower end. At number 9, this one might shock a lot of people that it's this low, but I like this one fine enough. I think it's good. This one's called All Hallows Eve, and this was based on a story by Bruce Jones. I gave this story about a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's a good story, just on the lower end. This is a very simple story. So you have these group of teenagers and this young kid who's a sibling of one of them, and they're preparing to go trick-or-treating at people's houses, and all these neighborhood people are scared of these kids, and you don't know why throughout the episode, but there's layers that continuously add in the story, and you realize the shocking revelation about why they're there and what's bringing them back on Halloween every year. There might be a ghostly vendetta. I'll just leave it at that. And it's really fucked up what happens to one of these characters near the end of the story. But it's kind of weirdly satisfying at the same time. But to me, there's not a lot to this story. I feel like it's a little too serious, too on the nose, right? There's a couple of things about it that are really creepy and genuinely thought-provoking. Like, you have some good layers to the story about, you have ideas of vengeance and the afterlife, and maybe there's an existence beyond, and you have this night of Halloween that brings it all to fold. It's almost kind of like an Omen story also thrown in there as well. So there's a lot of things I like about it. It's just a little too basic for my taste, and I feel like the story's kind of rushed through, and it's really ridiculous and over the top in some of the acting performances. That kind of dial it back for me, personally. So that's why I have it at number 9. Okay. Now at number 8, this is probably the most simply good thing I've ever watched in my life. Nothing more, nothing less. This is called The Companion. This was a story by Joel Casey and Keith Lansdale. I gave this one as well, 3.5 out of 5 stars. Low end of good. This one is, I think, just remedial, and that's why I have it here. Kind of, by the numbers type of storytelling. Typical revenge plot. You have this kid who's, he has like this jaded side to him. You could tell he's kind of gone through some trauma, and he's like really secluded himself in society because he's picked on relentlessly by this neighborhood bully, and he comes across this opportunity with this scarecrow that he interacts with, and I think the scarecrow even became a Funko Pop monster like the monster from The Man in the Suitcase, which I think is kind of cool. But this scarecrow, he has to kind of conquer it and learn how to tame it, and then he ends up being able to weaponize it and use it against his bully to get some revenge. It's good for what it is. It has decent layers to it that you've already seen in the franchise before, but it's fine enough. Now at number 7, I wish this one was better than it was because I love the concept behind this one. But this story was called Times is Tough in Musky, Holler. This was a story by John Skip. I think he's like a splatterpunk author. And I gave this story it's another 3.5 out of 5 stars. That seems to be the running gag so far. But I thought this episode was good, just on the lower end. I like the concept. You have these group of people in this town pretty much imprisoned in this underground bunker of sorts. And you have this woman that is pretty much telling them that it's time to leave the cell and it's time to go, pay for what you did. And you don't really get why these people are down there. But as the story goes on, you start to learn all these horrific things these people in the cell did to people of the town in the past. Some people caused some people's deaths and stuff. And when it finally comes to fruition at near the end of the story, what's going to happen to them, it is fucking shocking. And it's another one of those comeuppance tales. These people get what they deserve. And there's a fun little end note with some graphic body horror to kind of just sink your teeth into. It had some great acting performances in this episode overall. I dig the concept, but I just feel like it was a little rushed through. I think because of the time frame for this kind of story, this story needed about another 5 to 10 minutes, which is a little too long for an episodic setting. This could have been fine as like a 30-minute or maybe even like a 40-minute Tales from the Dark Side revival segment or something. It's a decent story. It just needs a little more fleshing. than what we got. And I kind of wish the back half of the story, especially the climax of it, we had a way more of that stuff, and it wasn't just plowed through, unfortunately. But yeah, it was a good story. I like the concept behind it. Now, in number 6, this is kind of bumping up from the 3.5. We're now entering the 3.75 out of 5 territory. This is By the Silver Water of Lake Champlain. This is a story by Joe Hill. This one's a higher good for me. I really dig this story. There's a lot about it. There's a certain ambiance and atmosphere to it that is really gripping. You have these kids. You have this little girl in particular. I think she has lost a parent or something, and her dad was like really involved in looking for this Loch Ness monster type of creature on Lake Champlain, and he died unfortunately, or something to that effect. And the people that she's with kind of doubt her and the existence and kind of make fun of her and make fun of her father's legacy. But they end up finding a dead carcass of one of these. And they're trying to weigh the options of what to do with it. And of course, because it's Creepshow, there's a fucked up angle dealing with one of the characters near the end. And there's some comeuppance with that. It's a very well placed story, especially given that this was a TV show budget. I like the effects, I like the atmosphere, what they were able to deliver on screen. I just wish that it was a bit higher budget and bigger scale. I feel like the effects were good, but could have been way better. I feel like the acting performances were kind of hit or miss in this episode too, unfortunately, and the story felt mildly truncated. But other than that, it was a super solid episode. I have not read the short story that Joe Hill wrote that this episode was based off of, but I do want to read it to see if I like it more. Alright, and the last of the good, we're not renting the top 5 episodes of the season. This was The House of the Head, a story by Josh Mallerman. I gave this also a 3.75 out of 5. I loved the concept of this story. It was told in such a creepy way. This is not a scary episode whatsoever, but it's so ingenuitous. Is that even a word to say? But you get what I'm trying to say. It's so creative and it's so much fun. It's also filled with Easter eggs from Creepshow's past. Like there's an Old Chief Woodenhead appearance in here. There's the crate from Creepshow 1 as well. There's a lot of fun things to notice in the episode, but the story is essentially about this girl who has these parents that encourage her to play with these dolls and learn her imagination in this huge one-of-a-kind dollhouse that looks amazingly detailed, and she has all these figures that she's grown attached to and bonded with inside of the house. But one day while she's playing with her dolls, she notices this weird zombie head with blood on the neck just randomly appears, and the family seems to be moving in the house. The family dog even is trying to get away from this head, and she is trying to figure out like what it's trying to do throughout the whole episode, and she tries to get other figures like a police officer and then the Old Chief Woodenhead, right, to try to help this family. But unfortunately things start dying, and there's some creepy shots with the head, and it has a really cool twist near the end. It's not the scariest thing ever, like I said, but it's just a fun concept, and she may or may not come out on top over this monster. There's also an intriguing thought near the end where she ends up potentially passing this curse on to somebody else, and it's, there's some things to think about with the ending there, but none of these stories really have that many layers to them. I mean, some do, but this one was just a shockingly just well-made one. That's why I have it this high, right? So now we're entering the very good territory. At number 4, the next story is The Finger, and this was a story by David J. Show, and I gave this story a 4 out of 5 stars. This one was a very refreshing tale. There was a lot of callbacks to Greg Nicotero's golden years doing practical effects. There's like a puppet involved. It's a really fun-looking alien creature type monster. And the story is so engaging because the main character breaks the fourth wall like pretty much the entire episode. And it's very well paced, very well put together for the most part. So this guy, he is like divorced from his wife, or his, I guess, his ex-wife. You know, he has an ex-wife and a stepdaughter that kind of piss him off. And he has grown, as he's been living by himself, to start collecting things, because I guess he has like a emotional attachment issues now because of what happened with his former marriage. And he ends up finding a random creature finger on the road one day, and he takes it home with him to preserve it. But he learns throughout the episode that this finger may be morphing and turning into a sentient creature, and it likes the cold, it likes to be stored in the freezer. And the guy ends up having the finger take care of some dirty work. And then he starts spiraling, and it goes to this whole mental health route, and that's pretty much where it ends off in the end of the episode. It's just a really fun little tale. It's kind of fucked up in a lot of ways. My only issue with it is there's a weird consistency issue with the episode, right? You have this beginning, and then you get to the middle portion of the story, which kind of sags a little bit, and then the final act just ramps up into the hammy department. And I think it's a little too ham-fisted in that message near the end, for my taste. But it's, for the most part, a well-packaged episode. Highly would recommend this one, okay? Might score higher for you, it might not. Now, my top three are pretty much a hard stamp top three. And at my number three, this is the only Stephen King story adapted in this season. It is Gray Matter, and this, I think, was the very first segment of the season. I gave this story a 4 out of 5 stars. This story was very creepy. I know it's based on a story that he did. I forgot what short story collection it was featured in. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But it was in one of them. And I thought this was a great beginning to the show here. It's a very emotional story. It deals with this kid. It's a stormy night, and there's these 3 adults. There's a woman, a sheriff, and somebody else. I forget what his profession was. But they're all huddled up in this lighthouse because a major storm is coming through. And most people have left town. But this boy comes looking for food, and they can't really help him. And he's like, all right, well, I guess I'll just hang out here because a storm's coming. And he starts telling this tale after he sends these 2 men off to go get some supplies to at least drop him off to his dad, because his dad's at home and he's sick and he needs something brought to him. And he tells this story to this woman that is just so gut-wrenching and so emotional. It's essentially a story about this kid. He lost his mom, and his dad turned to alcohol after his mom died, and his dad became an alcoholic. And then slowly he started morphing into somebody or something that he just didn't know anymore. And because he's his son, there's unconditional love. There's a lot of layers to this story. You have like addiction, alcoholism, changing into somebody that you just don't recognize anymore, and you know, unconditional love. You know, all that's there. And the story is more of a metaphorical sense. If you take the story too literally, a lot of this shit doesn't make sense, especially with how this monster creature is born out of the story. But this is more of a, you take it as a metaphor and it makes more sense kind of thing. But really what hits me the hardest about this episode, and why I put it at a 4 out of 5 stars, is because of the ending. The ending is completely left field, and it completely shits the bed. It makes no fucking sense. It's just out of nowhere, very sudden, trying to wrap up the story quick. Hey, quick, we got a minute and a half left. Let's wrap this shit up. That's how it feels. So that's why I put it this low. Okay. But it's still a great episode for what it is. Now, my top 2, I put here for a reason. My number 2 is Night of the Paw. This is a story by John Esposito. I gave this one a 4.25 out of 5. And some people might be scratching your head. Why would you rate this story higher than Gray Matter? Well, this one I feel was one of the more whole feeling stories of this of the season as a whole. I feel like what it was going for, it for the most part delivered, minus the ending. And that's really my only issue with it, if I'm being honest. The story is about this woman she is driving one night and she ends up getting into some type of trouble. Let's just say that. And when she comes to, she wakes up in like this funeral home type of place, and she has this surgical scar, and she's missing her fingers, and she doesn't know what the hell's going on. And she comes across this man, and this man pretty much tries to sit her down and tell her about why he saved her. And while they're talking, he reveals this crazy story about why he's doing what he's doing, and he goes into this sad story about how he lost his wife, and his wife had this monkey's paw. And yeah, this is a play on the classic fable, The Monkey's Paw, right? If you've read that story, you kind of know what to expect here, but it's a fun little twist to it all. Something completely different that I haven't seen before. And the man tells the tragic story of what happened with his wife with the monkey's paw, and then he comes to fruition about his involvement with the monkey's paw, and potentially now he needs her to help him finish off whatever he needs to do, right? And this may or may not happen, and then the ending, when we finally get to see what the girl is going to do after what the story has been building up the whole time, it ends so abruptly, and the thing that happens comes out of left field. But it's still shocking enough. I wish that the ending of the episode was fleshed out a few more minutes. I feel like this episode kind of suffers from the truncating of the time crunch and all that. Typical issues that a lot of these episodes kind of face. But this one was definitely more whole compared to everything else below it. Maybe not Man in the Suitcase. Man in the Suitcase and All Hallows Eve feel kind of whole. Some of these stories are more simple. There's not a lot to them that kind of drag. This one had a lot of layers, a lot of different points, a lot of time periods to go over. And for how well it delivered, how intricate of a story it was trying to tell, was very impressive. But it's not my number one. My number one is the only great episode in my opinion. The only episode I gave a 4.5 or higher to. And this episode was called Skin Crawlers. And this was a story by Paul Dini and Stephen Langford. I gave this segment a 4.75 out of 5. This was very close to being a perfect story, but I do think that there are some things holding it back. But I love the concept of this tale here. So there's this company that's pretty much propped up in the story like a hype train type of thing. Like this is a fad that social media will bite into, and people will bite into it because it gets a lot of exposure type of thing. And this doctor has come up with this new way of shedding weight with these creatures that are found in like rivers and stuff. They're like these little leech type creatures, and they'll suck all your fat, and you'll lose weight, and you'll feel better about yourselves, right? But the catch is that they have to kind of live inside of your organs, and it's like this whole thing that gets mildly explained in the story. But there's this man, the main character, he has pretty much bought all this doctor's products and cannot wait to be the live specimen on this, I guess, news broadcasting station's live example of this doctor doing it to a patient. For some reason, yeah, there's mild plot convenience with that. And he's kind of scared, but he gets coached by a few people that he comes into contact with. And it comes up to the day where he's supposed to have this thing done live on air. But there's a solar eclipse about to happen. And right before the eclipse, some weird things start happening. Things seem kind of odd. And then once the eclipse starts, all hell breaks loose. And you get to see what potentially comes of these creatures. You see this man going through this pretty much nightmarish ordeal, trying to pretty much survive where he's at. And he has some really good one-on-ones with certain characters, and that kind of bring a powerful punch to the story. And then it ends on a really fucking gross note, and kind of a lighthearted note, because the main character may or may not come out on top. But yeah, Skin Crawlers is such a fun story. It's so dynamic. There's a lot of layers to the story. Like I've already brought up, it's pretty much making fun of like hype trains and stuff like that. It's pretty much deconstructing the hype train, which I thought was really, really genius to do. blind faith is a good subtext to take away from this episode. That's pretty much what I got out of it. It's a lot of blind faith imagery here. There's also, there's kind of like a moral message, like with like modern medicine. They need to kind of, put things through trials before they give it to people. There's like some ethical, moral things to think about with this story as well. It's easily the most thought-provoking out of the whole episode lineup for this season here, and it feels the most at home with those old Creepshow stories that had a lot of layers to them, like some of the best ones from Creepshow 1, Creepshow 2, Tales from the Dark Side. Those layered, metaphorical, deep meaning type of stories. That's what Skin Crawlers kind of comes across to me. Same thing with Night of the Paw as well, maybe Gray Matter to an extent. But Skin Crawlers easily wins here as my favorite episode from season 1. Now, if I had to go ahead and add one last thing, I thought this might be kind of fun. If I got to make my own Creepshow movie out of these segments, which ones I think would have made a good movie, based on what we got, which one had the most potential to be featured on the big screen in my head. I didn't want to just pick my top 3 because they're the best. I kind of just thought which ones represented the Creepshow franchise the most. So I went ahead and chose Bad Wolf Down. It's easily the most schlockiest story of the whole season, and it fits right in. I think this would have been a fun movie segment, maybe extended by a few minutes. Up the budget, make it less hokey on the wolf design, and this one would have been a really fun episode to see in a film setting. The second one I chose is Times is Tough in Musky Holler. This one was the most disappointing one for me because this one should have been way better. If you flesh out a few more minutes, flesh out a few more storytelling aspects, up the budget, and add more of the ending there, if the movie was able to do that justice, the movie segments are pretty much not too far off from these episode segments sometimes. But this one would have been done phenomenally, I feel, with a higher budget. Granted, the Creepshow movies never had the highest budget to begin with, but I think it would be considerably better than the episode's budget. So, there's that. And then, of course, my number 1 pick for a Creepshow film would be Skin Crawlers. Skin Crawlers, Times is Tough, and Musky Holler, and Bad Wolf Down, I think would be the most Creepshow-like stories in this season. There were a few that were really good, like Gray Matter, that just didn't feel like Creepshow. It felt a little too serious. Not quite Creepshow-like, but, all these stories still fit into the franchise. I love them regardless if they feel like the series or not. But some did feel like the old franchise that I knew beforehand, more than some others, and that's why those 3 I think would be like a figurative movie if I had to choose. But nonetheless, that was my ranking of Creepshow Season 1. Thanks for watching the whole video if you sat through this. Let me know down in the comment section what your ranking of Season 1 would be. What is your favorite segment? What is your least favorite segment? Or what's your top 5? What's your bottom 5? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.